Hey folks, Ronan here, your host again for another episode of the Performance Process podcast. I'm going to keep this introduction as short as I can today because we've got an episode that I just want to jump straight into. It's with Sadie Fitton. Sadie has stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, a diagnosis that she got shortly after attempting the 24-hour elevation gain world record last year. I'm not going to give too much away now because we just covered all in the podcast, but long story short, she reattempted that 24-hour elevation gain world record recently, so that's post-diagnosis. And in the episode, Sadie tells us of her journey from that first attempt to become a cancer patient in a foreign country in a matter of weeks, right the way up to that second world record attempt, including everything you'd expect from an episode of Performance Process, such as all the optimization work that went into her training, her bike, her other equipment, the planning around the getting optimal conditions, how the heck you go about attaining a Guinness World Record, but also just what it's like to be living and training and targeting world records with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. So, as I said, I want to get straight into the podcast here, so without further ado, let's just do that. Well, Sadie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for your time today. I think we first met or spoke around about 2 years ago. Andy Van Bergen connected us to discuss climbing and elevation records, and as it turned out, we both had a similar idea in mind back then. That was a 24-hour elevation gain record that we're about to discuss today. But that's kind of where our similarities end, though, because while I loved the idea and got sucked into all the planning and optimization around it, I never actually made anything of it. But you, on the other hand, well, you made an attempt just over a year ago at this point at the elevation world record. Ultimately, that attempt didn't work out. You missed the record. There was a follow-up attempt, one with a heck of a lot of optimization and training and attention to detail that went into that, and that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today. But before we do, I want to discuss what happened 6 weeks after that initial record attempt. There's no easy way to say this. You were diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. It goes without saying that's a life-changing event. We need to discuss those elevation record attempts, but we really need to discuss that diagnosis first, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it informs so much of that second attempt and my motivations for that second attempt. So, it was 6 weeks after my first attempt, which would have been April 2023. 2 weeks after my attempt, I jetted off to Europe. I had 4-month holiday planned, 3 months finishing off my law degree during an exchange, and then a bit of holidays after. So I was in Florence actually, and I just tripped over and injured my leg and had an MRI because it hurt to wait there. And I found out, basically, someone translating from Italian into English for me, that what they found on the MRI was that I had tumours in all of my bones.
Wow.
It's hard to even recapture how terrifying and grief-stricken I felt at the time. I mean, I still have the diagnosis, obviously, but to be, the other side of the world and not really, obviously, completely out of the blue, I'd had no side effects. Even thinking back afterwards, sometimes in hindsight you can see that there were nothing. I'd attempted this record and I hadn't beaten it, but I hadn't gotten that far. I'd done well. Just completely out of the blue.
And I think it's important to clarify for listeners who may not be aware that stage 4 or metastatic breast cancer, MBC as it's known, it's cancer that has moved beyond the breast to other parts of the body. It's fundamentally different from earlier stage breast cancer in that it's treatable, but it's incurable.
Yeah, that's right. So I'd actually had a stage 1 diagnosis about 7 years previous. and I had treatment for that, radiotherapy and the like, and, you know, kind of thought that would be the last of it. It for most people, that would be the last of it for such an early stage. And yeah, for it to, out of the blue like that, to suddenly have, you know, not just recurred, but recurred to such a final extent. Yeah, it just suddenly seemed so final. And, you know, just felt like there wasn't anything there was nothing, like there were no solutions. You know, I just remember thinking, like, this is the end game. Like, I can't find a way out of this. Like, you know, most things that happen in life, you can say, okay, right, let's reframe, let's take a new plan. And I was just was like, what can you do?
Yeah, and I mean, on top of all that, you're not even at home. You're in Italy when you get this, on the other side of the planet, when you get this diagnosis.
Yeah.
That must have been, you know, incredibly difficult to get that diagnosis anyway, but then being so far from home.
Yeah, it was, and having to make the decision of whether I went into hospital there or did I fly home. How did I even start the process of being admitted to a hospital in Australia? It was the middle of the night, so I couldn't really talk to anyone. I basically didn't sleep that night because I was just waiting for the sun to come up in Australia, and so I could talk to people. I did manage to get through to my sister, who answered her phone in the middle of the night for once. Thank you. And she was just as stunned as I was, like that, you know, we just couldn't believe it. We just couldn't believe it, honestly. And yeah, that definitely made it harder. And my housemate and I had also decided to end our lease as well and our house, because we were going to be overseas for a few months. So we'd packed everything into storage. So it was kind of everything was so bad. The timing of everything, that it almost was funny.
Wow. So what did you do? Did you stay in Italy, or did you go immediately home, or where did you get admitted first?
Yeah, so I went home, which I'm super glad that I did. I got on the flight the next day, I think, and the uni was really good. They arranged it all for me and got home, I think, on the Friday and went into the hospital on Monday, the Royal Melbourne Hospital and Peter Mac Hospital in Melbourne, which is where I get my treatment now. And they were amazing. Yeah.
What does the treatment look like, and what was the initial treatment you had to get?
Yeah. So I spent about a week in hospital while I decided whether I needed a hip replacement, just because one of the tumours was at the top of my femur, and the tumours are weaker than bone. It had grown through into the stronger part of the bone, and they were worried that it could break. So the first thing was kind of deciding that. And then the second thing they had to do was firstly confirm that it was breast cancer, because they knew it was a kind of cancer that had come from somewhere else, and then what type it was, because for breast cancer there are 3 main types, and the treatment that you get is very different based on what type you have. And I had what's called hormone receptor positive breast cancer, the most common type initially, but in about a third of cases it can mutate when it comes back, and it could become the more aggressive and less treatable type, which is called triple negative. And so I had to wait as well for a biopsy of that to find out, you know, which one it was, because the life expectancies with the treatments at the moment are very different. So yeah, those first few weeks were hard, but I got good news that it still was that hormone receptor positive breast cancer. And so the main treatment for that is basically trying to stop the estrogen and the progesterone from reaching the cancer, because these types of cancer cells have what's called a receptor on the surface, and the estrogen binds to the receptor and acts as a traffic light, and it basically sends a green light to the tumour to grow. So if they can stop that, basically the binding of the estrogen to the cancer, then it can slow down or even kill the cancer, at least for a while. So the easiest way to lose estrogen from someone's body is to put them into menopause.
Okay.
So that was the first stage, put my ovaries to sleep. So all of the side effects potentially that come along with that, you know, probably about a decade or maybe 5 to 8 years ahead of time of when it would have happened, which obviously has ramifications for cycling. for a lot of different parts of cycling. And then some medication that basically kind of mops up whatever's left of that estrogen in my body. And tablets, daily tablets. For me, I've been really fortunate because I haven't really had a lot of side effects. But for some people, they do.
Speaking about side effects, how do you feel? Because I mean, looking at you, talking with you, looking at what you've done recently, it's not obvious that you've got cancer. How do you feel?
No, and I think that's kind of what's not very understood about stage 4 cancer is that there's plenty of people walking around looking very well, and a lot of them are feeling quite well. For me, I have fairly minimal side effects. I definitely don't sleep as well, and I have had problems with insomnia and the normal things associated with going through a menopause transition. So I do get some hot flushes, and I definitely noticed on the bike, I would say the main thing is I'm just not as resilient in hotter conditions. I think I overheat a little bit more easily, and my heart rate has a tendency to go up. That's probably what I've noticed. Other people definitely have more debilitating side effects. It really just depends, firstly, on what type of treatment you're on, and then secondly, how your body responds. And I think there's certainly strong evidence that shows that exercise, cycling, is associated with reduced side effects and reduced fatigue in relation to cancer treatment. So it also...
I presume nobody's done any studies on riding your bike for 24 hours up and down a hill, though. That's
no. It's difficult to say whether that's beneficial.
Yeah, I can imagine. As is the case with so much of the performance end of cycling. As I often say to people, cycling is good for you. I'm not sure what a lot of competitive cyclists do is good for us or not.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd shared an article with me. I think the title of it was "What I Wish My Friends Knew" about stage 4 cancer, and some of the information that was in there. Reading through it, it was some stuff that I'd known already and probably didn't want to just think about or acknowledge, and some was new to me. But it brought an entirely different meaning to me. Having, I know you didn't write the article, but having you sharing it with me, someone. The same motivations, the same goals, the same sort of lifestyle. Someone who, we've talked before about optimizing for these types of records. That some of the stuff that stood out to me from that article was just the sort of the challenges around for some cancer patients, just around having to talk about it all the time and having to the feeling that they have to be positive and have to have this positive mindset about tackling stage 4 cancer, but it's just not always possible to be that way. Have you felt a pressure to be positive? Have you felt, is it difficult to talk about it? I probably should have asked you this before we did a podcast on it, but
no, I said I was very happy to talk about it. Look, I didn't tell a lot of people in the first 6 months when I was coming to terms with it, close friends and family, and a few people, surprising people that, they asked the right question, and so it just kind of slipped out in the conversation. But I did think a lot about, how much I wanted to talk about it. And I think in the cancer community, or I think the language around cancer, this battle that you're going to win and you're going to fight, you're going to win, I know you're strong, it's not the right language. It's not helpful for someone when they know they won't win. That's not a battle I can win. I mean, best I can get is a draw here. Like, we both die at the same time, me and this cancer. So I think I cringe at that kind of language. And it's people die from this cancer, and it doesn't mean they didn't fight or they didn't want to live or they didn't get the best treatments. A lot of these are roll of the dice. Do you respond to a treatment? Does it last for a long time? And it's you can't really put, it's difficult for people's, not really quite sure how to say this.
It's not a defeatist attitude in any way. It's just that, there is not to be too blunt about it, but there is a harsh reality that the treatment will work for X amount of time. The X is unknown currently.
Yeah. And I think that is hard for people to wrap their heads around because, for right now, my treatment is working really well. I had extensive tumours through my skeleton and also through my liver. I had some as big as golf ball size, and I suspect my liver was going to fall over pretty shortly after my diagnosis if I hadn't received that. But I had a scan at 6 months and most of that cancer is gone now. It's, the treatment has worked so well. There's nothing that lights up in my body, in my bones, and in my liver there's just one small kind of marble-sized tumour. So, sharing that news with people, they're like, that's amazing. That's great. And you're like, yeah, it's really great. But it's not, I still feel like I need to say, yes, it's really good, but there's still cancer in my body and it's not going to ever disappear. And it's hard for people to really understand, I think. The problem is that the treatment works really well for a time and then the cancer starts to develop mutations and get around the drugs that treat it, and then those drugs stop working. So then you need to try another drug and hope that works, and that might work for a time, and then you might need to move on to, and eventually there aren't any treatments that work anymore. I mean, don't know how long that would be. Like I know some people have been on my drug treatment for close to 10 years and other people have, lasted less than a year.
Wow.
So it's, I think one of the difficult things, I think I may have said to you earlier that, it's difficult to know how to live when you might not be alive in a year, but you might be alive in 20 years. I mean, everyone has that to a certain extent, everyone can get hit by a bus, but it's a little bit closer.
Yeah.
It's more of a reality. So I think as part of coming to terms with that, that was what was hard in the early days,
I kind of wonder, does that, the cliche is like live life to the maximum or whatever. I don't know if you can make a decision in either direction with that when you don't know if it's 1 year or 20 years. But what I am interested in is, did that known unknown, if that makes sense, did that inspire your second attempt, or were you always going to do a second attempt at the elevation record?
I was always going to do a second attempt. I think about 1 or 2 days after that first attempt, I texted my coach, Stephen Lane, and I was like, right, I've got some ideas.
Classic 48 hours.
Yeah. And he was like, go away, have your holiday. We all need some breaks and let's talk about it when you get back. But yeah, I think at the time when I got the diagnosis, I had my bike with me. I was basically going to ride my way around Europe, and also had that record, like it was so close in time to when I got my diagnosis. And so it became part of that, the record attempt and the diagnosis, I think, were already quite strongly linked. And then that idea that this thing that I wanted to do again and I planned to do, initially it was like, well, I'm never going to be able to do that again. A lot of, I've got these tumours in my bones and I'm not going to be able to even ride my bike outside. I remember that night I put my bike in the laundry in the apartment, so it was a room that I wouldn't go into, and I deleted I couldn't even look at my phone and look at like Strava or like all those apps. I deleted them off my phone because I couldn't even look at them, that sort of not being able to ride my bike anymore. That was, at the time. I mean, obviously, the fact that I had just been diagnosed with this incurable disease was also devastating, but a big part of that was the riding the bike as well. And I'd be physically capable of it.
So that was initially understandably, I think we'd all assume that what you thought there was I'm never going to be able to ride outdoors again.
Yeah.
Presumably because the risk of falling and injuring is so much greater.
Yeah.
At how long did it take then to, or did you realize, or did the doctors give you all clear? Or how did it come about that you did get back outdoors on the bike?
A few consultations with the ortho team, and I think orthopedic surgeons are a little bit blasé about it. They love putting people back together. So they were like, well, don't go jogging. You can ride your bike. Try not to fall off. If you do, it's not the end of the world. We can put you back together. Mm-hmm. I think the oncologists and the exercise physiologists were a bit more conservative through the hospital, because I think especially for stage 4, there's not a lot of evidence about how much exercise you can do and at what point the fracture risk becomes too high. The exercise physiologist was like, okay, well, maybe you can do an indoor trainer. We'll set it up so your spine is in neutral position. And I was just like, that's not going to really work for me. I've already actually been riding my bike around a bit. The first time I rode outside, I was terrified, but I just jumped on my gravel bike. I had to ride 5 kilometers to drop something off to someone else. And I was like, right, I'm just going to do this. And so, early days, it was very much risk minimization. I was like, not going to ride when it rains, not devastating, avoid big bunches, traffic and all of that. And I still do to a certain extent. But, I guess risk versus reward came into it pretty early on. Mm-hmm. And knowing how much better I feel when I'm riding and out in nature and, socializing with friends through that medium, it just became, the reward was too big not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At what point then did you start thinking the elevation attempt might be back on?
Well, originally I thought, well, if I'm not allowed to ride outside, what else have people not done? And I know that no woman has ever done an indoor triple Everesting. Wow. Someone's done one outdoors, yes. But no woman has. I think there's someone who's tried a couple of times to do one and hasn't gotten there. And so, actually one of the first questions to the exercise physiologist when they were trying to work out what I was and wasn't capable of, I was like, so, like, theoretically, would there be any restrictions to me riding a bicycle indoors for 40 hours straight? And they were like, what? I thought if I'm not going to be able to ride outside, then I've got to do something else to kind of replace this. And to their credit, they said, well, maybe don't do it right now. Even with a little bit of liver damage or the treatment, in theory, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to do that, or there wouldn't be any danger in doing it. I think that's when we got to the keep your spine neutral bit conversation.
I wonder, had you had that conversation 10, 15, 20 years ago, would you have got the same answer? Do you know if healthcare has changed in the past while where they sort of maybe embrace exercise and that?
Definitely. When I first had my diagnosis, people were surprised that I was riding my bike to radiation therapy. And the physios that I saw in the hospital this time around, they said, 10 years ago we were begging the hospital to let us in, and now they're begging us to come and see the patients. And the very fact that the Peter Mac Cancer Hospital has specifically a team of exercise physiologists and physios in there, I guess, is an indication. Mm-hmm. What I found for definitely for stage 1, 2, 3 cancer, there's a lot of evidence and push for people to exercise. I'd say stage 4, there's less. When I was doing my research, Googling, trying to find someone who was still riding their bike. And, that you come up with someone who's ridden a 10-kilometre, 10-mile ride, and everyone's like, amazing, person with metastatic cancer rode 10 miles. And I'm like, I mean, it is good, but I want to ride further than that.
Yeah, it's not what you're aiming for.
No, that's not my normal. And I think, that's the thing. Like, it's what people want to be able to do with this is relative to what they've been capable of before. And there was not a lot. But then I found one woman in the UK, Christine O'Connell, and she had been diagnosed with stage 4 and gone on to do things like the Alt Route, and she has an annual charity called One More City, where they ride from one city to another. And then at the end of that year, the city that they finish in, it's the city that they start in the following year. I guess to signify that the journey with cancer in stage 4 is never over, because you will always have treatments, you will always have medical checkups, and you'll be taking this treatment for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I reached out to Christine, and she was really, really lovely, and I was able to talk to her about what she's been able to do. So that was really comforting.
Yeah. I was going to ask, does that give you confidence or motivation, or how does, having found Christine and spoke to her, was that like the final confirmation you needed that I can reattempt the record, or it might not even have been the record, it might have been I can get back to the cycling I want to do.
Yeah. I'd been riding a little bit by that stage. I mean, even about 2 weeks after my diagnosis, I went to the high country in Victoria just, to get out in nature, and I took my bike, and I think I'd been on some quite strong painkillers at that point, and tried to ride up Falls Creek, which is like a HC climb, and I barely made it to the end of the driveway, and my heart rate was like through the roof. But I went back the next day, and I could ride, but I really couldn't decide whether it was possible until I'd been back riding for a while. Like, there were just so many unknowns at the start. So I kind of had the idea in my mind probably from around when I talked to Christine. But it was then start the treatment, see what the side effects are, get back on your bike, start to train. And I felt like I could still, like, my power was still there, my endurance was still there. And I think that's when I started to think, well, maybe I could do this again after all.
I've heard so much about this bright country, and I've obviously never been, but next time I go to Australia, I have to go there, because almost every Australian I speak to has been there for riding at some point. It just sounds amazing. But one thing you mentioned there was you were on some high strength painkillers at the time, and I mean, again, it just comes back to just lack of understanding for people not going through and not living with stage 4 cancer. But that again sort of surprised me when you said I was on high strength painkillers, because although you and I are talking here, we've talked before this podcast, I still hadn't pictured you actually in pain. Was that from side effects? Was that from the cancer? Where's that come from? And is it still the same for you?
I actually, day to day, I take any painkillers generally. I think it was actually from my original injury, which had been that jarring of the hip. And we didn't know early on if that was cancer-related pain, because people with tumours in their spine often do get a lot of pain, kind of an aching pain. It often gets worse overnight. So there are a lot of people that would be taking painkillers. And also sometimes they have radiation therapy, which helps to reduce the pain. But I had just had that initial injury, and then I'd had the biopsy and spent a week in hospital. And I don't know, my body didn't like standing still as well. I think being in the hospital bed for a week was worse. Like, so I don't think it was actually the cancer, but we didn't know at the time. So that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, I'm just trying to just trying to work out in my head, like, how much of it is like you've been told you have this thing and that's how you know, and how much is this thing impacting you on a daily basis?
The initial pain was definitely from the Florence tripping over the pavement and jarring my hip, and a bit of arthritis. So day to day, I mean, I don't have any pain. Even the side effects are, it's hard to say. Like, I'm definitely tired, but I think just the mental side of still processing that. Like, I don't think it's a disproportionate amount of tired, considering I'm kind of I feel pretty close to my old self in terms of energy and side effects. Like, I don't, I forget. Like, I forget sometimes even that that this has happened.
Hmm.
It's not always, I mean, obviously I'm thinking I don't ever truly forget, but
You can,
like,
it's not all consuming.
no, at the start, I remember the diagnosis, we were like, myself and my family, like, we just couldn't wrap our head around it. And it just felt like we'd been punked and someone was going to jump out and it was just some elaborate scam or a practical joke.
Hmm.
And even
Mistake.
now, yeah, ha ha, surprise. Even now, I could believe that it was just like it wasn't real, because I don't think I've actually had side effects from the cancer in terms of like bone pain, what we talked about, or
Hmm.
yeah, it doesn't feel real at times,
Hmm.
because the impact on me has been so much less than what you would think in terms of the physical, and even in terms of the mental. You just get used to it. Like I just don't think you can live in that heightened state of fear and terror. Like, I guess maybe that's part of the human brain, that at some point this is the normal thing. I have to just go, okay, this is happening. Or, you know.
I think that's so important to hear those, because like we all know cancer exists. We all are, roughly aware of how many of us will get cancer in our lifetimes, and how serious or how treatable it can be. But at least for me anyway, it's there, but you don't really want to acknowledge it, and you don't really want to have to, especially if at some point we're all going to be touched by, maybe not personally, but one of our family members or close friends or something will be touched by cancer. You kind of like, I'm going to put that off until that happens.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that's why we're talking about this first in the podcast, is because just understanding what it is, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah, and it is. I remember a week or two in, I just had this thing, like my whole world had just collapsed around me, and everyone else was just going to work. I just remember one day where I was so sleep deprived, and everyone was just going to work, and there were traffic jams and people were tooting at each other because they were annoyed, and someone's out walking their dog, and the whole world just continued. And it just, yeah, I mean, and then you have to as well, because the reality is, why would you worry about cancer? Like, I mean, it's normal to just not think about it, because I think everyone who is diagnosed, it does come as a shock, because
I think that's much easier said than done. That's you'll go a long way before you find something more inspirational than what you've just said there now. So I'm curious, at what point, like you made the initial record attempt April last year, you went to Italy, 4-month holiday planned. Where are we up to now when you went to the high country, when you went to Bright? What is that, October time? When is that?
No, I actually went to Bright. It was before I'd even started my treatment. It was just, I just need to get away and out of the city and back to nature. And I just found that to be, it just felt like a bit of space to breathe and just feel what I needed to feel. And
the reason I ask that is just, I know that the record attempt, you've got like a very narrow window in terms of weather optimization when you can and can't do this. So I'm sort of, I'm wondering at what point, because then you also have to train for it. And we're going to get into how you train with a cancer diagnosis. But like, how far out did you decide, okay, we're going to do this again, we're going to try it again March 2024? What did that look like?
So I would say by mid-year, I'd gotten a little bit back on my bike. I was kind of feeling okay, and I had it back in my mind thinking, hey, actually, this thing, maybe it's possible after all. I had one thing that I needed to do. I wanted to finish my law degree, because I was just a few subjects away from that. So I thought, all right, finish my law degree and just try and keep my legs active, do a little bit of cycling, that was finishing up in December. And then a month or two before that, I just started, I'd actually made the decision that if I was going to do it again, I'd be speaking publicly about metastatic breast cancer, because I didn't really see that narrative in Australia. And just talking to people, realizing how little it was understood. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to do that. And, maybe raise some money for research as well, for the metastatic breast cancer, and get the community involved as well, because obviously it actually is a rather expensive thing to do, to attempt 24-hour world record. It actually ended up, in theory, you could just jump on a bike and ride up and down your hill for 24 hours. In theory, it could cost you nothing, right?
Well, you probably need some energy gels and drinks and bars.
Oh,
and
yeah. You need 24 hours of food.
Yeah, and what's the chances of us going and trying something like that without spending an optimization of the bike? But I get your point. Yeah, you could do it.
Yeah. I think, didn't Emma Pooley do an Everesting on a can of Coke or something? The one that she set a record on? There was a little preparation there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's scary.
No. So yeah, if you're going to ride for 24 hours continuously, then you need to ride a lot before that 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of food and drink for sure. And you want your bike to be the best as it can be. And yeah, there was a lot of expenses, and I wasn't in the best financial state after my diagnosis. And so I thought, I would like to do this as a fundraiser. And so I feel like I would feel comfortable with asking people for help to support it this time around, I think. Yeah. Andy Van Bergen the first time around had said, oh, I can help you with this, I can help you with that. Do you want me to do like a little GoFundMe to cover the cost of surveying the hill? And I think I said something to him at the time like, oh, no, I wouldn't quite feel comfortable getting people to put money towards something like that. Like, let's just keep it that for like things like people with cancer or something. Some kind of comment like that. And so
you said that first time. Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I remember making that comment. And so, yeah, second time around, I thought, well, you know what?
I already said this.
Turned that down last time. Well, it turns out.
Yeah. And so you decided to go again. The first I had heard of your second attempt was you have an Upstage NBC Instagram account. That was where I became aware of it. Through that, I realized that you're raising funds for the Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation, and you had a target. Well, you had a target of $14,624.89, which is a very specific number. It's the dollar value or the dollar figure that matches the elevation gain you needed to achieve to break the world record. We'll come back to that in a second, obviously, but just first of all, you've smashed that fundraising target. You're currently at $17,000 and counting. That must feel great to have done that. Yeah,
that was amazing. Like, everyone was so generous, and word of mouth, and that point that you start to get donations from people you don't even know, then that's really touching. And people sharing their stories of people they knew or know with metastatic breast cancer, and all the words of encouragement. It was really, really touching. A few anonymous donations who donated quite a lot, and I still don't know who they were. So, if any of those people are listening, thank you very much. It was great. And we had a lot going on behind the scenes before that Instagram launched. So I'd spoken to a few people, Andy Van Bergen, who was, so excited from the start.
Yeah, so anybody who doesn't know Andy Van Bergen, Andy works with me here at Escape Collective. You might not see his written work or hear his voice in the podcast, but he's very, very key to everything that we now do here at Escape. He's also the founder of Hell's 500, the keepers of the cloud, so to speak. He's the person effectively that made everything a global phenomenon, and the challenge that it's gone on to be. Everybody will be aware of everything. But you had help from others also.
Yeah, the design work was actually a very good long-time friend of mine, Sarah Smith, and my housemate as well. And she was in her final semester of a graphic design degree, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And she had one lab project to do that she decided that she wanted to do it based on cycling, some kind of cycling-related project. And at the same time, I had been thinking about Upstage, and it didn't have a name at that point. And yeah, we just started talking about why doesn't she do a project on this, because it's a real thing, and something obviously that she's going to strongly support. And so she did all the graphic design work for that and put a little supporters pack together that was amazing. We sent out to people and everyone just said how professional it was. She got one of her fellow students at the uni to do the photography, Amy. Just amazing. We could put that along with the design. So Andy saw that ahead of time, and then he offered to help out with some custom kit as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Instagram account looks fantastic. I think that probably, it certainly, from the very first post, you sort of knew, well, this is something that's very, very serious. And I guess it had to be when you're targeting 14,624 meters of elevation gain, which in itself is, I mean, obviously a huge challenge, but you were going to try and do that in 24 hours, and separate those two out. 14,000 meters of elevation gain, that's a blooming hard cycle. Or a 24-hour cycle.
More than I've ever done.
or 24 hours on the flat. Even 24 hours on the flat would be incredibly tough. I would love to do a 24-hour, but it scares the heck out of me.
I would not like to do 24 hours on the flat. I could think of nothing worse, to be honest.
There's so many.
It has to be climbing. It has to be.
There's so many avenues we could go down now just to sort of unpack all that. But what I'm most curious about is what initially prompted you to target the elevation world record, and how do you go about determining whether or not that is a feasible goal to target?
So I think it starts as all good, ridiculous stories start. It was lockdown.
Okay.
This is where everyone's ideas come from, I think.
Well, it used to be in the bar, but now it's lockdown, yeah.
Yeah. I had Andy Van Bergen again. It always often comes back to him. He'd done a virtual Everesting weekend. I think it was Easter 2020, and a bunch of friends had done that. And I thought, oh, it can't be that hard. You just get on your bike and ride. And it wasn't that hard. I was fairly fit at the time, luckily. Fairly fit, fairly light. It was okay. And I thought, if I get to 8848, I'll just keep going to get to 10,000 if I still feel okay. And I did. I felt okay. So I just was like, I don't really want to do this again, so I'll just go to 10. So then it's done. And when you do something and then you think, wow, like that was hard, obviously, but if I did that, then what else could I do? Like 48 hours later, your brain just starts going, well, okay. Even if when you finish, you said, I'm never doing anything like that again. It seems to be the way. Mm-hmm. That's how you get yourself into these problems. And I remember just Googling, like, I wonder what the Everesting outdoor record is, to see how fast it was. And I didn't get around to Googling it, but then the next day there was breaking news. Emma Pooley smashes the Everesting world record. And I was like, right. Okay.
She's pretty fast.
Maybe not that one.
Yes.
And I think I just looked for others, and I found that 24-hour record. It's quite old. It's from 2016.
Wow.
And a French woman, Stephanie Gross, did it, I think, on Mont Ventoux.
Okay.
She set that record. So it's been a long time since anyone's touched that one.
Have you spoken to her? Have you been in contact with her? Or just...
I had a little look on, in Strava, and I couldn't really find a lot, and I never really tried to get in touch with her because I wasn't really sure
She maybe
if
hasn't
that
ridden a
sounds
bike
right.
since. Maybe that put her off cycling 24 hours up and down Ventoux.
Yeah. I mean, I thought at first I was like, oh yeah, I haven't heard of this person. But when we did a little bit more looking on the internet, I think she did do what was then the Tour de France.
Okay.
So she was probably at least a semi-pro. Well, I guess not many women pros in the 90s, like, well, not getting paid. Depends how you class professional. So she obviously had some cycling pedigree about her. But I just broke it down. I thought, well, how much elevation is that per hour that I would have to do? It's probably roughly about 600 meters an hour. And, then obviously then you just pick a hill and ride up it and see how much, how far you can go in an hour. Like, obviously you can kind of figure it out to about 12 hours, I reckon. You're like, okay, based on what I've done before, I can probably guess how it would go up to about 12 hours, and beyond that, I have no idea. That was kind of where we got to with the, how do you work out the power that you can sustain, the amount of food that you can take in.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you could go and ride at a power and see how long a lap takes you, and then multiply that out to figure out how many laps you're going to do in 24 hours and how much elevation gain you get there. But yeah, there's even that. I presume there's a difference between the power you can sustain, for 12 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours going up and down a hill, 24 hours on the flat, 24 hours going up and down a hill. There's calculations there, presumably, that just are not all that easy to make.
No, I mean, at least going up a hill, you have recovery. I think the hill that I eventually chose, One Tree Hill, about 14 minutes up, about 2.5 minutes down. So,
what were the parameters you were looking for, or the characteristics you were looking for on a climb? Was there like a percentage gradient or a length, or what were you looking for?
Yeah, I didn't want something too long, because I didn't want to descend for a long period of time. I just wanted a short descent, and so I would just cool down a little bit. And I wouldn't get too cold and my neck wouldn't get too stiff on a longer descent. So I thought, somewhere around that kind of 10 to 20 minutes would be perfect. And you can probably, that's the kind of length that you can stomach doing one more time, as opposed to, like an hour climb, the thought of starting an hour climb again when you.
Was it the same climb for both attempts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was pretty happy with the climb. So about 10.5%. You need something fairly steep for a record. I guess you would know that as well, because you're fighting two things. You're fighting gravity and you're fighting air resistance. So the gravity, you have to fight it regardless of how steep the hill is, but the slower you go, the less air resistance there is. So the steeper hill, then, for the same amount of effort, you're getting more of that energy put towards overcoming gravity and not air resistance. So about 10.5% was the gradient. Reasonably steady with a bit of a false flat about 2/3 of the way up, so you had a little breather.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Beyond
about 10%, you don't get a lot of advantage in terms of reducing the aerodynamics.
Well, on the descent,
it depends how fast. It depends how fast you're going. I definitely wasn't going as fast as you were.
Well, I mean, if you've got a 14-minute climb, it's not going to be arrow straight. So you're going to have corners in there to consider. So that's the very, very different characteristics of descending there.
And there were a few little, I had to brake a little bit, but that would be for such a long period of time, 24 hours, having to brake a little bit on the corners and lose a bit of time. I mean, it adds up, but at the same time, it's not going to be the deal breaker in terms of whether you make the record or not, because there are other factors that are going to play a much bigger part, fatigue and fueling and hydration primarily.
So how many laps did you need?
So I needed 71.
71 laps.
Going into my first attempt, I didn't have the $1,000 to pay to get the hill surveyed, which is the requirement for the Guinness World Records. And so I just guessed, I could look at the topographic lines, and I think it was around 205, 203. So I think it's at least 200 meters. But I don't recommend trying to set a world record when you are unsure about the exact elevation, because you will spend a lot of time during that record attempt doing sums in your mind. If it's this much, I've done this much. If it's this much, I've done this much. And it's a bit of mental energy that's best conserved if you have to ride for 24 hours.
I find it different. I'm terrible at math, and I found the distraction trying to calculate what my finishing time was going to be actually helped time go by.
Yeah. I think towards the end when I was getting tired, it didn't help. You know.
What would the total distance be then if it's 71 laps? What was it? What was the distance per lap, or what was the total distance?
Yeah, about 2Ks for the climb. So I think about 270 Ks per lap.
And that's the reason I asked that question, is because, again, going back to the challenge you were undertaking, 24 hours is a big challenge. 14,000 meters of elevation and more is a heck of a big challenge. But even just a 270 kilometer day, just putting this in context here, even just a 270 kilometer day on the flat in a group, whatever, is going to be...
It's better than I've ever ridden. What about you?
You just went out to smash all your PBs, and
it would have been most elevation, most distance, most time.
You mentioned the Guinness Book of Records there. What's the process look like for getting a record into that hill survey, as you mentioned? Not something that I think most people would think about.
So they need to have a professional surveying of the hill to know the elevation gain exactly. And so luckily, we were super fortunate that Veris Engineering came on board the second time around, and they did that for free to support the project. Yeah. And then you need to have a witness at the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill signing you off each lap. And you need to have a camera.
Like a Guinness employee, or can that be anybody, or how does that work?
No, it can be anyone who doesn't stand to gain. So you can't have your coach or... also, I think a family member is forbidden, but other than that, if it's just someone that you know, a friend, or another member of the cycling community, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, a Guinness official.
Someone who's willing to sign to say that they witnessed this happen.
Yeah, you don't have to be an expert at witnessing.
But when you just think about, you can have anybody up there, it seems like it's not all that... rigorous, that's probably the word I'm looking for. But when you actually think about it, in this person, you break a world record like that is going to get a lot of attention, and they have to put their name there to say this did actually happen. This is legit. If it wasn't, that's a difficult thing to do. Yeah,
and it's the package of all the evidence that they look at. So you're supposed to also have a camera running 24 hours. So we had a GoPro. We had 2 GoPros set up at the bottom, just taking, I think, a 10-second time lapse.
Okay.
Plugged into a battery pack, and we were just hoping that it would last.
I'm curious, does somebody at Guinness plan to watch those 24-hour long time lapses?
Yeah, because you for the 12 hours where it's dark, you would see nothing, and then once every 14, 15 minutes or 17 minutes, if you cleared the descent, there would just be like some lights that you would see.
That sounds like a job for AI. I want to ask you about riding in the dark, but let's finish the Guinness, the process or the protocol for, because presumably that's a big stressor as well. If you're doing this and you want to achieve this, you want to ensure that you've followed their protocol, and you're not going to have some nasty surprise post attempt where they turn around and say, but you didn't do this. So
the videoing was stressful. I think the first time we had 3 GoPros running, and then the second time we had 2, so that if one of them fell over, and then we also had everyone taking a photograph of me every lap, and I was running my Wahoo, and then I had a spare in my pocket in case that file corrupted as well. Like, I mean, I would be more devastated the fact that I couldn't upload it to Strava than the fact that I couldn't submit it to the Guinness World Records. That in alone would just be heartbreaking, I think.
I'd be heartbroken if I missed a KOM because the file was corrupted. Never mind. So, you talked about a package of evidence. So it's witnesses top and bottom, camera running 24 hours, the Wahoo file, you had a backup going as well for both the Wahoo file and the camera. Is there anything else required? Oh, the survey had to happen. You tick that off. Is there anything else on their list, or is that everything?
Yeah, I think that's everything. And then you just, any other footage that you've got that kind of adds to the body of evidence, they'll gladly accept. But I know there's been like men who have broken the 24-hour record, but they haven't met all those requirements. So the Guinness World Records hasn't been updated with subsequent breaking of the record. And I'm sure that they legitimately broke the record, but they didn't meet the requirements.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, to some extent, you have to have these requirements in place before you can ratify something like that. That makes sense. Guinness Book of Records sounds great, but it also does sound challenging. The other challenge that we touched on there was riding in the dark, and that's the part. Climbing in the dark presumably is fine. You've got a headlight, but descending in the dark, that would be the part that would be scaring me.
Yeah. So the hill I selected, I didn't select for this reason, but I was very glad that there aren't really a lot of wombats in central Western
wasn't
Victoria.
Something I'd been thinking of, but okay, that's a good point.
Because those guys can be pretty active at night.
Okay.
There were some kangaroos around, but that just meant I took it careful. Dawn and dusk, I just slowed down a bit, and but once the night time fell, there didn't seem to be any critters around, so that was a big positive. The hill was not too technical, and that was deliberate as well. And it's called One Tree Hill in a regional town in Victoria, and it's a lookout at the top, so it's a dead end road. And then the bottom as well is just a junction where you can pull in and do a very easy U-turn on quiet road. And I had really strong lights. So Exposure Lights was another company that came on board, and I had a 2000 lumen front light that I could flick through different modes. So I had it on just like really low power going up, and then flicked it onto the 2000 lumens for the ride down, and that was really good. That was very well lit. So the first time around I rode through the day and then into the night, and this time around I started in the evening to ride through the night first, so I'd be fresher. But yeah, that's a tough question to decide when to start for 24-hour period.
That's one I've always wondered. Yeah, what was your method for deciding on that?
So first time around we thought, well, leave the period where you're going to feel tired because you're riding your bike for 24 hours to when you would normally feel tired anyway. So you're going to feel tired, so you just embrace it. It's going to be you're going to be tired later on. Go with your natural body clock. I think we got up about 5, which is definitely not my natural body clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, but it was good enough. You get up, you kind of half asleep the first few laps, you've done a couple of hours, and before you know it, it's midday, and then you've ticked off 5,000 meters already, and it just went quite quickly. So that was part of the thinking. And then the problem with the first attempt was the sun came out in the afternoon, and my core body temperature was already quite elevated because I'd been doing these 14-minute up, 2.5-minute down laps. So that 2.5 minutes wasn't much time to cool down. And because I was going so slowly on the way up, probably around 7 or 8 kilometers an hour, I had a tailwind. There wasn't really any evaporative cooling. This is kind of what we realized after the event. And so my core body temperature got up quite high. So I was really just super primed. And then the sun came out and it heated up, and the combination of the already elevated core and then the heating up of the skin meant that, from early afternoon through to evening, I just suddenly felt very, very unwell on the bike. And I think that was a big factor in not succeeding the first time around. I think I felt like I was overheating. I was sweating. My heart rate was really high. I wasn't sure if I had underfueled. So it was a question mark, have I underfueled or have I just overheated, or a bit of both? And so that both of those things fed into the second attempt to make sure that I was not underfueled and I wasn't overheating. So that tied in as well to when we started, and we thought, well, if I start in the late afternoon and ride through the night, that's what I'm going to be riding the fastest. So it's naturally going to be cooler. That will be more beneficial. I'm going to be stopping less, so I won't be getting as cold from the overnight temperature, which I had gotten very cold and stiff the first time around as I started to ride into the night. So, and it was really nice riding at night, you know. But then, yeah, you definitely hit that at 2 a.m. where you start to.
Most people
the hope was you just get through that bit, and then the sun comes up and you feel okay. And I'd replicated it about a month out. I'd done an indoor Everesting starting at 6 p.m. and riding through till 6 a.m.
I remember seeing that, on your account.
Yeah, because I'd done long rides, but I hadn't done that, hold the power for 12 hours. Like I just chose Innsbruck, and it was like pretty similar. Oh no, Bologna climb, and it's really similar.
Okay.
Stats. So I just wanted to know whether I could ride through the night and how my body responded to the caffeine and if that stopped working at some point. And I also tried one of those, I think it's Science and Sport nootropics.
I hope just one.
Yes.
Okay. Did you see the small print?
I had them in a little bag that had danger printed on the bag for my actual attempt, in case, to make sure that no one accidentally handed them to me, because they have what do they have in their caffeine? A bunch of stuff. It's like a Red Bull in a gel. Plus.
You heard about my mistake, right?
No, I did not.
I did a stage race this time last year, and I thought they were just Beta Fuel gels, so with like 40 grams of carbs or something, and hadn't realized the caffeine content. And for 2 days in a row, I had consumed 6 gels each day, and got, not recommended at all. I was in a bad way, so yes, I hadn't seen the small print.
At what point did you realize?
And it's probably best I don't explain at what point I realized, but it was after the second stage, when I was thinking that I was not going to be fit to start the third stage. And yeah, I don't want to take us off the topic of discussing your elevation record attempt, but I do always feel the need to remind people or to inform people, because I just didn't know that those SIS nootropic gels are strictly 1 per day.
Yes.
So
and the writing is very small. There's not a lot.
It's fine print on the back. And
nootropics, that doesn't. What does that mean?
It didn't.
No one knows what
it
means.
Yeah. Apparently, if I was a university student, I would have realized that nootropics is a stimulant they take to help with study and preparation for exams. But I'm not, and I didn't.
Yeah. No, they were locked away, and I had very clear instructions to please don't hand me these until I'm begging for one.
But they are very potent. I can imagine how beneficial they would be 2, 3, 4 a.m. if you hit a slump.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I had when I did my test run, I had a coffee at the start and then a coffee like 11 a.m. And it just actually, when I had one at 2 a.m. when I was starting to feel that real seedy fatigue, it just felt like having another coffee. I think taking it at that time of the morning when your body is just wants to fall asleep, it felt like I was having just a coffee. But I imagine if you took it at another time of the day, I think someone said they took one and they felt like they were on a trip. Like it really had an effect on them. But at 2 a.m. it just feels like it just wakes you up a little bit.
You probably need it that badly. It brings you back to a norm rather than bringing you to some sort of high or whatever, for lack of a better term. So yeah, we've covered everything off in terms of like the motivation for the attempt, the preparation, the planning, the choosing the hill and all that. Before we delve into the training, which is obviously a huge part of the preparation, and the bike optimization and your nutrition also, I do want to at this point just ask you to tell listeners how the attempt went.
So ultimately it didn't go as hoped. The first attempt I had gotten to 10,000 meters in 16 hours, which was pretty good. That was on schedule, but the rate I was going, if I sustained that, I probably, we decided it was slipping out of reach and let's just call it a day, have another crack. The second time around, I'd adjusted the schedule, but I actually didn't get as far the second time. The first time I did 50 laps, the second time I think 38. I got cramps probably at about 10 hours in, which I don't cramp usually ever. I can count, on one hand how many times I've cramped on a bike in my life. And at first it was just trying to clip in. I'd go to straighten my leg to clip in, and it would just, like, my hamstring and my calves were pinging, so it would take me a few goes to clip in. And then eventually it just started shifting to all the muscles that I needed, like in my quads. And I jumped off the bike at one point.
Oh.
And I would, yeah.
We were discussing a couple of days ago, like it's always like the main event day that cramp seems to strike. It's never in training. It's never in B or C target events. It's always the big day that cramp seems to.
And there was the contributing, what I think was, well, a couple of contributing factors. One is the hill is supposed to take about 14 minutes to get up.
Mm-hmm. And
I set off on my very first effort, like at the start of the 24-hour period. I didn't really warm up, which I probably should have, but I thought, I'm doing 200 watts. So, it's upper zone 2, and I don't really need to warm up. I can just warm up on the hill. And I felt terrible that first lap. My heart rate just spiked so fast. I was sweating, I was breathing, and I thought, should have warmed up. Feel terrible. This is not great. Got to the top of the hill and I looked down, and I had done this 14-minute hill in 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was actually the fastest time I'd done that hill. I think I might have got a PR, and I was like, okay, obviously my power meter's not working, not calibrated. It rolled back down.
You were following power, and you think that the power led you to too fast a time. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a man. I know how to pace.
I mean, it's so easy done getting the first lap, just completely overcooking it. Just you feel good. You're on such a lightweight setup. Everything's optimized. It's kind of hard to see.
I should have felt like I was flying. I was tracking the power, and I got to the top pretty much smack bang on 200, 205 or something like that. And 2 minutes faster. So I was like, okay, recalibrate my power meter, come back down, have another go. And I think I got up about the same, 12 and a half. So that was bad. That was really bad.
You knew then that was going to be a problem, did you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I couldn't trust my heart rate because it was always going to be higher when there's, something on an event day. My heart rate just always runs higher. So I couldn't really use that to pace. I obviously couldn't use my power meter to pace. The only thing I knew was how long roughly the hill should take. And I hadn't done it on this exact setup with this weight. So I kind of just was like, okay, just keep slowing down until you get to about 14 minutes. So I don't know what power I was doing the hill at. It may have been a bit high still. I'm not really sure. But I just did each lap slower until it took 14 minutes to get up it. And then, my power meter was being accurate in that it was consistent. It wasn't. It was accurate in that it was
accurately inaccurate.
It was reliable. It was reliable, but not accurate, if that makes sense.
I wonder if VAM might have been a better, or not a better, but I mean, in that scenario, could you have used VAM instead if heart rate and power weren't proving reliable on the day?
I think VAM would have just been a similar pacing to elevate to time, because it was a fairly steady gradient. And so I just I think it was like 30. I think it was 30 or 40 watts lower, and I just went, all right, my 200 watts is now 160 watts.
I mean, that's just so frustrating that a power meter, these things that are like, I mean, these things are expensive, and they can let you down on, the race day, so to speak, like so badly.
I've had this Asioma power meter for years, and I've switched it between all bikes, and I've never had a problem. And I just put it on. We can talk about a little bit about the bike setup, but I'd put it onto these rotor cranks, like a week before and taken it for a ride. Everything seemed to be fine, but I hadn't really specifically tested the power. I rode with some friends and it seemed like they were riding slow. And I was like, why are you guys going so slow? But they were doing an Everesting roam where they were riding 5,000 meters in a day. So I thought they're just pacing themselves. So I'll just drop back to their pace.
Mm-hmm.
And the average power for the ride seemed low, but I had a 26 chain ring, 26 tooth chain ring on the front as a 1x. So I couldn't really pedal very much on the down. I couldn't pedal on the downhill at all.
Yeah.
It was the strangest setup. And so I thought, that's why my average power is low, because I just wasn't pedaling half the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And is it working fine again since, or have you used it since, or?
I haven't used it a lot since. So I did a little search on the internet for, Asioma and Rota friends. Couldn't find anything. If anyone knows of any issues using those together, I couldn't find it. And I've got like a regular 2x setup, but I just haven't really had the chance to test it out yet to figure out if there is a continuing issue. But yeah, that was a big blow, and I think that's why I cramped later on. I think that was a major contributor, going out that hard, for 4 or 5 laps. I got back into the rhythm, and I think at 6 hours I was back on track. I was on my schedule. I was feeling okay. So I was feeling quite optimistic at that point.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's important just to just to mention why that fast start becomes an issue, because it effectively puts you in debt right from the start, and an energy debt, so to speak. And it would have been fine if you're just doing a 2-hour ride, but when you have to do a 24-hour ride and you start in debt, that debt starts compounding throughout, and sort of, at least from my understanding, slowing down well below the pace to get you back on to target pace doesn't really repay that debt. It just sort of you're still moving, you're still exercising, you're still expending energy. You can't really repay it. It's like a vicious credit card interest rate.
Yeah, I did the damage, but I had the interest-free period for another 6 hours.
Buy now, pay later.
Yeah, it was definitely that kind of thing. I think it was, And you already don't know over 24 hours how you're going to go. So I knew I should be able to get to 12 hours, and I barely got to 12 hours. The cramping kicked in before that. And I'd done that multiple times and not had an issue before. And I wasn't overheating. I think that, and then also maybe a bit of the nervous energy leading into an event. My coach said he knows many people who can train hard and then come event day, fairly similar conditions, and that's where they'll get their cramps.
There will be those listening also who maybe think, well, you should have tested this setup in advance. But like, again, you mentioned the 26 tooth chain ring. These elevation or Everesting record bikes, they're not the kind of bikes that you can just train on all that often. Certainly mine wasn't. So I'd imagine yours wasn't all that conducive to normal training, and you couldn't have ridden it for months in advance, I don't think.
No, my original bike from my first attempt, we did it a different way. We put a really big cassette on the back, and then we did it as a 1x. So the crank on the front stayed as a 32 or 34, and I had a mountain bike cassette and Di2 derailleur on there. So I had a 46 tooth chain ring. So I could kind of get away with that because it had a bigger range. So I did ride that for a month or two before and kind of iron it out, but we switched it around. So we kept the part of the issue was this new bike, which was amazing, giant TCR SL0 with the Dura-Ace 12-speed. There aren't a lot of solutions, but it's not compatible in the same way that the 11-speed is with the mountain bike Di2.
Okay.
Or it's not yet. So we couldn't just chuck a mountain bike cassette and derailleur on the back and have it work. So, and also it's heavier. Like if you can keep your cassette the same and make your chainring smaller, then that's a massive weight saving, which when you're riding up a hill for 24 hours is a big plus. but it took a while to actually figure out how we could do it, because a lot of the 12-speed things are still rolling out. And it was, the bike shop, it was a bit stressful for a while. We were looking at maybe having to put my 11-speed back on to find a solution, but they were amazing. They found the rotor cranks and a mountain bike 26 tooth chain ring, and they managed to make it work. And it ran so smooth.
Wow.
But yeah, it meant that I had it just a week before, and also you just couldn't ride it.
Yeah. It's built for purpose.
Yeah, it seemed to be working fine.
Yeah, you mentioned the bike there. You had and the reason I wanted to ask you how the event went. You've done the event twice, or the attempt twice. Presumably, you would have made changes, optimized things, trained differently following the first event. I mean, you've also got cancer now, which you didn't the first time around, or weren't aware of the first time around. But one of the things that you changed was the bike, and you're now riding a giant TCR. It had KDX wheels, Vittoria Corsa Pro tires. You had the Instagram post that I've seen had a 3446 drivetrain on it when that was posted, but that changed ahead of race day, is what you were just explaining. What I'm interested in is, first of all, what weight that was. Did you weigh the bike before you set off? And if there was anything else you'd done to it that I'd missed?
Yeah. So I think that bike itself out the box is about 6.8 kilos. That's your starting point. That's with disc brakes. My original bike hadn't had disc brakes, which it was kind of okay for 12 hours. And then after 12 hours, like my arms and my fingers from the braking and the carbon squealing at the turnaround, you had to brake quite hard leading into the U-turn bit. And I mean, everyone knows disc brakes are amazing, but I also was like, I'm fine with rim brakes. But yeah, after 16 hours of rim brakes, I was like, I'm never doing this again without disc brakes. Like, I need disc brakes, but that's heavy. And to get to the same weight as last time, which was about 7 kilos, I'm going to need a really expensive bike that I definitely cannot afford at the moment. So I went to my bike shop, St. Cloud, and they have really great relations with Giant, and they were just like, here's a bike. This is what we need. This is going to be so exciting.
Wow.
So they provided it, and also the customization. So the Cadex wheels, yes, amazing, super light, and we also replaced the handlebars and the stem with the Cadex system.
Okay.
So that saved a few 100 grams there. The drivetrain conversion saved a bit away as well, because you're losing your front derailleur, you're losing your big chain ring, and the small chain ring is smaller than it was, and the back end is all just staying the same. The bars were narrow. I went from 42, which was custom, to 38, which was a lot. That wasn't done for weight. That was done for comfort.
Okay.
But that
presumably
that
also some
a
small weight gain or weight saving, and I mean, on the descent you might have had an aero gain also. Who knows? Yeah,
maybe. Yeah, maybe a little bit. And then that was the main changes. I had a power mirror saddle, the 3D printed one. That's actually not the lightest saddle out there. You would think it's 3D printed, it's got all these holes in them, it would be super light. It's pretty light, but it's really, really comfortable. I mean, and if you have to ride for 24 hours, that's definitely worth it.
Just on that note, did your bike fit change in any way specific for 24 hours of elevation gain?
I actually went, like, the first time around, I went to see Stuart Morton from Rider Fit, and I'd been having quite a few issues, like with my neck and my shoulders just getting really stiff, and I'd been trying to fix it myself. Like, I was like, I need to shorten it in and lift it up a little bit maybe, and I just made my bike position terrible, and I took it to him and I'm like, I'm really sorry, I think he put most of it back, but the thing that he did that was counterintuitive was he actually dropped the front end. He removed a couple of the bars and kind of slammed the stem a bit, and it it actually, for me, it worked because it kind of just opened it up and gave me a little bit more space.
Mm-hmm.
And I never would have thought to do that. And it helped a lot. And then because you are on a 10.6% gradient, that's going to bring the front end up by a lot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a really low front end and then you're tipping it all the way up, it's actually quite a comfortable position for going uphill. And the other thing I changed was the narrow bars as well. And as soon as I did that, I could feel the benefit. It felt weird at first, but it just, rather than like you kind of get into the position where you're finding yourself rolling your shoulders down because your hands are a little bit closer together. And for me, that was quite a big difference in comfort.
And were you climbing on the hoods or were you climbing on the tops, or where did you find yourself positioning your hands?
Yeah, on the tops, not in the drops. So yeah, on the hoods normally.
On the levers, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I did originally have the original giant bars that came with the bike were flat across the top, and that was really comfortable for climbing. The Cadex ones were a bit more rounded, so I think having flat bars for 20, like a flatter top, would be better for comfort. But the Cadex are also ridiculously light and still comfortable.
The other thing that will have changed is just how you trained and prepared for the event. We could go into what kind of training did you do and all those things. It would be super fascinating. But I mean, the obvious question is, how does having stage 4 cancer impact your training? What does it change? Anything? Does it change everything? How does that look?
Yeah, it changes it a little bit in that I now have effectively the body of someone who's gone through menopause. And so things that work in the past for me now what might not necessarily work now. In terms of, body composition changes, it's harder to maintain muscle as you enter menopause. The stimulus for losing weight is you maybe need a stronger or a different stimulus. So in terms of the training for the event, it was mostly similar, like lots of zone 2 and then quite a bit of 90% kind of sweet spot repeat for quite a few hours. But then we added in some like sprint intervals as well, because they are supposed to be beneficial for a couple of reasons. First of all, if for menopausal, postmenopausal women, they help with body composition changes. So helping to assist with losing fat and not hopefully losing muscle. So that's one reason to put them in. There's some evidence to suggest that. And then the other reason is that the zone 2, I don't know what the technical term is, but that's your mitochondrial, the development of the mitochondrial something or other. You want that, right? But if you're doing sprint training, then that's the development of the efficiency of these mitochondria.
Okay.
So there's a benefit, even though you're not really developing, I'm not sure if I'm using the correct terminology, you're not developing that kind of anaerobic, that's not really going to be a benefit for you in terms of you're not going to be spiking your power during the 24 hours. But doing these really short, sharp efforts have a function that helps you operate better at a low intensity.
Yeah, I mean, nor was it the motivation for you to do these intervals. It was you weren't going to be needing a peak power or a sprint.
No,
that also wasn't the motivation.
No, and everyone was scared to go riding with me because they're like, you're going to be so fast. You're going to drop us you're going to drop us up all the hills. And I'm like, I'm not fast. Like, I'm nowhere near my best 20-minute power.
Not even trying to be fast.
And it would just, we'd go out for this big long ride and we'd all be climbing it. The only difference was I would just go for longer and I'd feel fine. Like at the start, we'd all be climbing at the same speed, or they might even be climbing faster than me. And then by the middle, they'd be starting to drop off and then I would tow them home and they would be wrecked and I'd be quite fresh. But I hadn't gone hard. I'd just been eating and drinking and tapping out my 200 watts.
Obviously, you mentioned eating and drinking there. Obviously, that's going to be key to any ride, not not just a 24-hour ride, but you'd done some lab testing to try to nail down pacing strategies and nutrition strategies. Is that right?
Yeah. So I did lab testing at a later date. The first thing I did was kind of some gut training and trying to see if I could take in some higher carbohydrate rates, because I didn't know if I'd taken in enough during that initial attempt.
Okay.
I'd taken in 60 grams an hour, which is a reasonable amount, but it's, these days people talk about 90, 120 grams an hour. So I thought more is better. Let's test this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's everyone says, you've got to train your gut and then you get used to it and then you can tolerate this. And I was like, okay, I don't know what gut issues actually are because I don't think I've ever actually had them, but let's give this a go. So I started at 80 and I did, I think, a 4 or 5 hour ride and was like, that's fine. All right, let's make it 100. Did 100 grams an hour. I was using the beta fuel there. So yes, that's that ratio of fructose to glucose that's tolerated. And then I got up to 120 grams and I thought I did that fine for about 5 hours. And I'm like, this is fine. Like, I don't know where my breaking point is. Part of me wanted to find it, but at that point I thought, am I actually burning this much energy? And I did some really basic sums and I was like, I'm pretty sure that I'm actually consuming more calories here than I'm actually burning on this ride.
Mm-hmm. So
while I can take in 120 grams per hour,
do you need to?
Should I actually be taking in that much? That was part of the reason I went into the lab, and we were able to test exactly, what I was burning in terms of carbohydrates and in terms of fat, because at those lower intensities, quite a large proportion of what you're using as fuel is fat, especially if you're well trained. And so I wore a mask. I was on my trainer for a couple of hours at home, just replicating the hill and the fueling, and then came in and did a couple more hill efforts at the same power and with the brakes, wearing the mask that measures your oxygen and CO2. And from there, it can calculate how much energy you're burning and what proportion of it is fats and carbs. And it was about, I think, half and half, maybe, fats and
well, I have the results here.
You
just
do?
Taken straight from your upstage MBC Instagram account, and they are 11 calories per minute you'd calculated, or 150 per hill repetition, 2-to-1 carb to fat ratio. And from there, you worked out that you would need 26 grams of carbohydrates per lap, or presumably easier to keep track of, you were going to need 75 to 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour, which, confirms your suspicion that you didn't need to be going as high as 100 or 120, and you're better off matching demand to supply.
Yeah, and you have your glycogen stores as well in your muscles, and your body's going to mostly use that for the first 6 or 8 hours or however long it takes until that's depleted. So then if what's happening to all of that carbohydrate that you're taking in the first 6 hours that your body's mostly not using, not really sure. And so we actually adopted a strategy that I tested in my overnight thing, where I started at, I think, like 45 grams an hour for the first 6 hours, and then I bumped it up to 60 grams an hour for the next couple of hours. And then I was intending to push it up to 80 grams by the end of that 12 hours. But I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor, so I could kind of keep an eye on whether it was enough, roughly speaking.
Was that useful?
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of talk about how they are useful or not useful, and I found it to be useful in probably 3 ways. I'd say for that kind of ultra endurance state, knowing that your fueling is sufficient was, because it's approximating your blood glucose, right? So if that drops too low, you're going to kind of go into a state where you're feeling like you're going to bonk. So I could just check that during a ride and make sure that my levels were staying at a fairly elevated rate. And if they was staying pretty stable, then I knew that my fueling was probably about right. If they started dropping, I'd just bump up my fueling a little bit, or if they were a bit higher, I knew I could just ease off a little bit. So it just gave me certainty in one of the very large number of things that could contribute to things going wrong. So, you know, I'd be feeling like shit. I remember on the, oh, sorry, am I allowed to say shit?
No, that's fine.
So I was feeling, after I'd done those first few laps and I was feeling terrible, I was like, you know, am I fueling? Do I have enough fuel? A few times that I started to feel bad during the effort, and I'd scan it, check, and my glucose numbers were high. So I'm like, okay, it's not under fueling that's contributing to this. So that's fine. Keep going at the rate you're going. That's on track. So I guess it gave me certainty when I was feeling like rubbish that it wasn't under fueling that was to blame. So I could feel confident in my fueling strategy. The other thing that I found was I'm quite susceptible to reactive hypoglycemia, where you have a snack and it just spikes your blood sugar, which it does to everyone. That's a normal bodily function. And then your body releases the insulin. But I don't know if my body just releases a bit too much insulin, or some people, you know, get that. You always will get a slump or a drop, but I get quite a dramatic drop. So it helps you to know when you need to eat or how long you need to wait until you ride your bike again. Because if you eat and then sit around for half an hour and then jump on your bike and you've had that spike and then that drop, you are effectively starting that ride or that workout with your body saying it has nothing, it has no fuel, and you will feel the physical symptoms of that. I had one workout where I had a snack, waited a bit. I hadn't looked at the monitor, but I started the effort and I was sweating and my heart rate was high, and I was like, this is a long workout and I am very much in trouble already in this workout. I don't know why I should be rested. I should be there. And then I beep, 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 low glucose. And I was like, oh no. So I just smashed every gel that I could, and gradually over that next effort, it came back up and my heart rate dropped back down and my sweating really reduced. And I think that first and second effort were the hardest of these 10 or 12 efforts that I had to do. So yeah, meal timing in regard to when you jump on a bike, really important. I mean, you probably wouldn't want to spend your $100 for a fortnight just to always know what your blood glucose is doing at that moment, but to get an awareness of it and see it.
Was it Super Sapiens you were using, or which one was it?
Super Sapiens was never available in Australia.
Okay.
I think because it's a medical device and they had to get approval. But I don't really understand why, because the one that I used is, I think, identical to Super Sapiens, but it's for diabetics. It's the Freestyle Libre. But it looks the same. I think it is the same unit.
Yeah, the Super Sapiens were using that sensor. But yeah,
you couldn't display it on your Wahoo or your Garmin. You just had to manually scan it with your phone. But I would say, yeah, just getting your timing right, especially if you're susceptible to hypoglycemia, around fueling before a workout or a race. Like normally I'm running late, so I'm throwing the food in my mouth as I'm running out the door, which works. But if I'm not running late, which doesn't happen very often, then yeah, that kind of bonking 20 minutes into a ride.
That was actually one of the learnings I took from the period where I used Super Sapiens also, was just where previously I would have had a meal like 30, 40, 50 minutes before I went out, I'm better just sort of cramming that in as I'm going out the door. Neither are ideal, but one was less ideal than the other.
Yeah, it seemed to be for me like at least 2 hours before. Or right as you're jumping on the bike.
Is that something that you feel was different before the diagnosis, or was that always the same?
So I had that before. I think I'm just a little bit susceptible, but I know that some people with the treatment, it does make them more sensitive, or they can almost become like that insulin resistance or sensitivity or, pre-diabetic. Someone else I was speaking to said, if they have the cafe stop now, she can't have the cake while they're sitting in because it'll just wreck her, which is heartbreaking.
Stopping and resisting the cake must be very, very difficult. The other thing that we hadn't mentioned was actually that you mentioned your law degree, which I believe you've completed that now.
I have. Yes, that was one of my goals.
Congratulations.
Last year. Thank you.
You're also a meteorologist, if I'm
yes.
correct. And I'm curious if that was any advantage in, or how you used that skill set in planning your attempt.
Yeah, it was definitely useful. So I have been a weather forecaster for about 10 years, or had been for about 10 years. I was forecasting in WA before I moved back to Melbourne. And
the sea breeze then and the
prevailing wind directions.
Yes.
Yeah. So, fairly familiar with the weather patterns. But I chose the hill first for the gradient and the lack of technical descent. And I actually hadn't ever ridden it prior to finding it. I just poured over Strava and was looking at the gradients, trying to see where they were close together, where the lines were close together. So first and foremost, I wanted the gradient, I wanted the non-technical descent, and I wanted somewhere that's safe to turn around. And I wanted a good view, like the views from that hill are amazing. But then I also wanted a tailwind because even though people think
you don't want a headwind.
I definitely don't want a headwind. Like everyone kind of poo-pooed that, it doesn't really, wind direction doesn't really make that much difference when it's 10%. It does. It definitely does. Like, especially if it's the strong wind. And the second half of the climb is very exposed, and I could feel it like on the days of the attempts when the wind picked up, my lap would be like 30 seconds faster. Wow. Maybe not 15, 20 seconds faster, over. It felt like someone, giving you a little bit of a push up the back. So I was only ever going to do that with a tailwind. And that meant that I needed it to be an easterly or a southeasterly, which if you are in Melbourne, people would know that you hardly ever get a southeasterly in Melbourne. So I did have a few people mansplain, I would say, to me that southeasterly is not a very common wind direction. And, it probably wasn't going to happen.
You were like, it's because of me that you know that.
Yeah.
Being a weather forecaster.
Yeah. So my response to that, my friend was sitting next to me when her husband made this comment to me, and she was like, oh no. And he was like, she's a, and I was like, yes, I won't say his name. It is very rare to get a southeasterly in Melbourne. However, Ararat is quite far inland, and the high pressure system often sits in the Great Australian Bight this time of the year, and the high pressure ridge lies north of Melbourne but south of Ararat, and that means when you have a southwesterly in Melbourne, you will have a southeasterly at One Tree Hill. So it actually is quite a common wind direction. And then I think he realised that I had thought about it a little bit at that point. So I knew that wind direction was favourable. I'd had a look at the wind rows for that site. It shows the 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. wind and what are the prevailing wind directions. And I knew that wind direction would be cooler than, say, a northerly. I knew that it would usually come through with quite a decent gusty wind.
Okay.
So it would be decent strength, and it would be a little bit warmer overnight because when the wind's higher, it mixes through and you don't get as much cooling of that air, as opposed to when there's very little wind at night. That's when you tend to get your fog and the very rapid cooling close to the surface. So I knew for a number of reasons it was very favourable, and I knew that it would happen quite often. So you'd get your cold front come through, and then you'd have the high pressure system push in behind, and you have a couple of days where it would be favourable. And I didn't want any other weather conditions. I wasn't going to do it with any other weather conditions. And so I needed it to be something that would happen repeatedly, like something that was quite common. And you would see it a couple of times a week at least.
Do you, like, going back to Guinness Book of Records there, do you have to give them X amount of notice that you're going to attempt this, or can you literally wait for the right weather conditions that you'd know were about to happen and then do it that week?
Yeah, I just had to register that I was going to attempt it.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you could do it after the event. You might still be able to get away with that. I specified a day, but I said this was just an approximation. The trickier thing was having a bunch of witnesses or a bunch of people that are on standby who I needed to already convince to stand at the top or the bottom of a hill
for 24
hours. And be like, it's probably going to be Friday, but it might be Saturday. And if it's not, it might be next week. And I can't guarantee it won't be midweek. I'll let you know probably 3 or 4 days out.
I don't know if you agree, but I find the hardest part of any of these things is asking for that commitment from people.
Yeah. And look, people were so generous. People who did it the first time around just said, if you ever want to do this again, please sign me up. And people that I didn't know very well contacted me and said, do you need any help? Can I stand on the hill? And I felt bad for the fact that people had to do it at 4 a.m. But a lot of them just said, well, we're just happy to just stand on the hill for a few hours and we're glad we're not riding for 24 hours.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I'd rather ride for 24 hours than stand on a hill for a few hours at 4 a.m., to be honest.
Yeah, no, I like, people have said to me too that they would, love to help out. If you're doing something again, let me know. And why didn't you let me know you're doing that? I would love to have helped, but asking is still it's still not easy to ask.
I think I saw the first time how it was fun, and it was probably less fun the second time because we just basically did it through the night, and then I cramped, and just as the sun was coming up, it was all over. But the first time around, it kind of was a party on the hill kind of atmosphere, and there was some fun in it.
Sorry, got us off the weather forecasting track there. Going back to that, just one final question. Like, I'm curious, did you have access to any additional resources or tools that made it easier to predict when you were going to get those conditions?
No, I possibly I would have access to it through work, but it's just those big scale weather patterns, where the high is, where the low is, like that kind of stuff is pretty readily available on the internet. So
if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, if you know what you're looking for. So I didn't really need it. Yeah, it was sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what's clear here is there's a heck of a lot of preparation went into this. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in terms of the record, but I think in terms of the fundraising so far, it's been phenomenal. That very much definitely did work out. You've smashed through the target as we mentioned earlier. I have to ask, is there any temptation for a third attempt?
Yeah, there definitely is. Like, it just felt like unfinished business after that second one and cramping. Like, there wasn't much I could do about the cramping once it had fully set in. And I had done so much planning around other stuff that if I could come back and have my pacing from the start, like, I would like to give that a crack still. I think, especially with the diagnosis, we didn't really speak about it much earlier, but that resistance of the drugs, of my treating drugs, is going to occur eventually, and I'll move on to another treatment, and I don't know how long that will be. And so I don't know how long I will have the ability to attempt something like this. So I guess that's in my mind, that, I don't know how long until I wouldn't be able to do something like this occurs. So I think I want to be able to do something ridiculous like this still. That's the motivation. I've got a few other priorities at the moment, a new job and finishing off some stuff to finally become a lawyer. That's all just kicked off now. So that's the priority for the next couple of months. And then I definitely have in my mind, I think you said earlier, there's only some narrow weather windows for when it can occur at that hill. October is good conditions, and kind of late May into early April are favourable conditions. Other than that, once you get to November, it's too hot. It's too far inland, it doesn't cool down. And once you get past April, the temperatures just drop really, really rapidly overnight. So there's really only 2 periods of the year when realistically you'd want to do it without making things much harder for yourself. So yes, I definitely, it's TBD or TBA on the page at the moment. No official date has locked in. I'm riding my bike a bit, but I'm just spending a bit of energy with other things for now. But yeah, we did so much prep work, and I think almost underestimated how much energy that prep and the promotion and the fundraising took in terms of going into that event realistically probably quite fatigued mentally, especially the last few days we were rushing around. Like, I'd had my taper, but I didn't have the rest. And I think looking at both events, and we spoke about this a couple of days ago, there's kind of 2 facets to your fatigue. There's the muscular tiring of the point where your legs start to hurt and they're screaming, and you're ripping muscle, you're causing the damage there, and so your power drops. But there's also this other kind of fatigue mechanism, which is more of your central nervous system, which is going into a more of a sympathetic drive, like a fight or flight state. And that's the bit that's, the messages in the brain telling you you're so tired, please stop. Or even it can be physical, like the symptoms of anxiety, like a kind of a bit of a dizzy head or elevated heart rate and sweating. And both attempts, I didn't feel like I'd reached my physical muscular capacity. I still had power in my legs. My legs obviously hurt a bit, but they didn't hurt. They weren't dead, They never reached that dead leg state. But it was more just my way that my body was responding was the limiting factor. And so that's, I think, what I need to focus on leading into a third account or a third attempt. How do I put my nervous system in a better state leading into it, and how do I soothe it during the event so that I can limit? I don't think you can eliminate it. 24 hours is a long time. I think you're going to reach that state, but if you can reach it later and have some tools to combat it, then that may be, I think that is the difference.
Have you thought yet how you could change that for a future attempt, or is that something that can be addressed but you haven't yet looked into ways to do so?
I think I definitely noticed during the first 2 attempts when I was starting to fall into like counting laps and thinking about whether it's possible, just putting on a podcast, something that grabs your brain and just takes it away from thinking about that kind of stuff. It just takes you out of that environment. And I have actually noticed like a physical improvement in my condition from just being distracted. But it has to be the right podcast, because there was one that I was listening to.
Not any of mine.
No.
Not any of
mine. No. It was just it was just a bit jarring, and it wasn't what you could listen to at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I just kept turning that off, and I think I should have put on a different podcast, and one that would have been the right listen for that time of the morning, rather than just continuing to try to listen to that podcast. Whether you could, I mean, I had everyone knows like you can do your deep breathing, or you can do some kind of grounding where, you're taking the focus away from your thoughts and, putting them somewhere like, what can you see? What could you smell? Or something that I do, let's go through the alphabet and name an animal that starts with A and then B and C, and like you get to X, Y, Z and you're like struggling. But that sometimes, I know in my life in general, things like that can just take away that focus on the negative, or and that can have an effect on the physical. So which of those tools could be beneficial? I don't know, like it might be that it's inevitable at 18 hours. It's like, I don't know whether these tools would be useful when there's so much accumulated fatigue. Possibly. It's hard to test because you can't just go out and do an 18-hour ride very often. Yeah.
I get the sense that when you've got something in your head like this, you're not going to rest until you've had another attempt at this. I very much look forward to hearing if that does happen, and tracking the sort of, if there's any. I mean, you've got so much in place already. You talked about the fundraising and the surveying for the hill and the bike alterations. All that stuff's already in place. It seems like it might be more accessible to go for a future attempt, and I look forward to hearing whether it does. And I especially look forward to just where we concluded there, the sort of the not so obvious optimization you can do around the sort of the mental approach to a 24-hour elevation record attempt. So if that does happen, we'll have to get you back onto the show again. In the meantime, do you want to let listeners know where they can follow you, where they can follow Upstage NBC, where they can donate, most importantly?
Absolutely. So the Instagram handle is Upstage NBC. So that NBC, that stands for Metastatic Breast Cancer. So MBC. The same handle you can use on Facebook if you don't have Instagram. And also we have a website, upstagenbc.com, and that will send you to the fundraising page, which is for Peter Mac Hospital. But yes, I think it's in my brain and there's a few things to work through. I think I'm on the right track in terms of that kind of mental nervous system fatigue. That's the thing that needs some thought. And like you said, a lot of the groundwork was laid for this second attempt, and a lot of that took up a lot of time and energy. As amazing as that community support was, things like this do still take time and energy, and going in, if there's a third attempt, a lot of that is already in place. So I can go into it hopefully, knowing that it's something I need to focus on, being in that very healthy state of mental rest, I suppose.
It's the immeasurable that is maybe the last piece of the puzzle there, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time today. That's we're nudging up against 2 hours there, so really appreciate you joining us on the show. I think that was very, very important, and also very fascinating insight that you give us, both into obviously stage 4 cancer diagnosis and then the record attempt, which thank you for sharing.
No, thanks for having me.